We are also privileged to have two excellent panel for discussion, discussing the cases. I'm very happy to introduce Dr. Vinita Rao ma'am, who has completed her post-graduation from Shankar Nethralaya in 1988. She has worked as consultant in the Department of Cataract and Uveitis in Sri Ganapati Nethralaya till 2017. She is presently working as senior consultant in the Department of Uveitis at Shankar Nethralaya, Chennai. We also have another senior uveitis consultant. I'm very happy to introduce Dr. Vijay Pratap Singh Tomar, who did his fellowship from Shankar Nethralaya, uveitis, uvea and medical retina fellowship from Shankar Nethralaya. He has worked as a senior consultant and uvea specialist at Sitapur Eye Hospital and RIO Sitapur, and is presently working as professor and head of the department in the Department of Ophthalmology at ASMC, Hardoi, Uttar Pradesh. I'm very happy to welcome both of you as panelists here. I'm sure their presence will enrich the discussion and add valuable perspectives to these interesting cases. I now request Dr. Anshukita to present her cases. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. I'll share my screen now. Okay, I shall start. So, good evening, everyone. I'll be presenting two uvea cases today. So, my first case was of a 36-year-old male who presented to us with complaints of both eye floaters for 3 months. He also had redness in his left eye on and off for 3 months and diminution of vision for 1 month. He had consulted at his native place and was diagnosed with granulomatous uveitis and was started on medications including prednisolone acetate 1% 6 times per day and bromophenac eye drops 2 times per day in both eyes. However, the symptoms were not relieved, so he consulted our OPD for a second opinion. When we examined the patient, we saw that the vision was 6/6 N6 and everything else was normal. However, when we examined the anterior chamber, we when we saw the cornea, it had mutton fat KPs in right eye, and in left eye had pigments over the endothelium. Anterior chamber had aqueous cells of 1 plus in right eye and 0.5 plus cells were there in left eye. Iris showed broad-based posterior synecdoche in 4 to 7 o'clock hours, as can be seen here. And also there were peripheral iris nodules at 8 o'clock, as we can see in this picture. Left eye also showed broad-based posterior synecdoche at 10 and 7 o'clock and inferior pars, as we can see here. Pupils were sluggishly reacting to light in both eyes, and lens was however clear. AVF also showed vitreous cells in right eye and left eye as well. So here we can see, as we already saw, that we can see mutton fat KPs are there, iris nodules are there, and pars is there. And it is much the nodules at the near the angle can also be seen on gonioscopy, and there are pars also, as we can see. In left eye also, these pars are much visible, as well as the nodules is visible. The fundus examination also had few floaters in right eye. We did ASOCT for this patient. Right eye showed angle nodules, as well as in left eye a few early nodules were there. So our clinical diagnosis was both eye granulomatous anterior uveitis with intermediate uveitis. We performed few laboratory tests. We saw that serum ACE levels were elevated and Montauk test was negative, and all other tests including HLA-B27 and everything was negative. We did aqueous tap, which again came negative for MTB. HRCT chest showed bilateral mediastinal lymphadenopathy with patchy peripheral parenchymal infiltrates and few thin plate-like atelectasis in right lung, as can be seen in the picture. So our final diagnosis was both eye anterior with intermediate sarcoid uveitis. This Diagnosis was again based on the revised criteria of International Workshop on Ocular Sarcoidosis for the diagnosis of ocular sarcoidosis 2019. I'll like to discuss it a bit. So it consists of three categories. First is that we should rule out the other causes of granulomatous uveitis. Second is there are certain defined, basically 7 defined intraocular signs that are suggestive of ocular sarcoidosis. These include mutton fat, keratic precipitates, large and small, and or iris nodules at pupillary margin, or in stroma. Second is trabecular meshwork nodules and or tent-shaped peripheral anterior synechiae. Third is snowballs or string of pearls vitreous opacities. Fourth is multiple chorioretinal peripheral lesions, both active or atrophic is included in this. Fifth being nodular and or segmental periphlebitis plus minus candle wax drippings and or macroaneurysms in an inflamed eye. Then comes the optic disc nodules or granuloma and or solitary choroidal nodule. Then is the bilaterality that is assessed by the ophthalmological examination. And then the third category is of systemic investigations, including bilateral hilar lymphadenopathy. Then second is negative tuberculin test or interferon gamma releasing assays. And then third is elevated serum ACE. Fourth is elevated serum lysozyme. Then fifth is elevated CD4 by CD8 ratios more than 3.5 in bronchoalveolar lavage fluid. Sixth is abnormal accumulation of gallium 67 scintigraphy or 18F fluorodeoxyglucose positron emission tomography imaging or lymphopenia. And then last one is parenchymal lung changes consistent with sarcoidosis as determined by pulmonologist or radiologist. So these three categories are there. So based on these, the diagnostic criteria defined is definite or ocular sarcoidosis, presumed and probable ocular sarcoidosis. Definite ocular sarcoidosis is the one where the diagnosis is supported by biopsy with compatible uveitis. Presumed is one where diagnosis is not supported by biopsy, but bilateral hilar lymphadenopathy is present with 2 intraocular signs at least. And probable is where there is no biopsy, neither bilateral hilar lymphadenopathy, but 3 intraocular signs are there, and 2 systemic investigation should be there from. So in our case, uveitis and mutton fat KPs as well as iris nodules. We could see the tent-shaped pass in the gonioscopy as we saw, and it was bilateral. In systemic investigation, also bilateral hilar lymphadenopathy was present. Our Montauk test was negative. Elevated ACE was there. So we made a diagnosis of presumed ocular sarcoidosis in our case. So the management included starting off topical steroids and homatropin drops. He was also started on oral prednisolone with tapering schedule along with Shelcal and Pantop, and mycophenolate mofetil was also started for this patient after, and he was also sent for physician's advice for the management of any systemic systemic sarcoidosis. So this is the 1 month post treatment follow up. We can see that the iris nodules are all gone here in left eye also, and it is also much visible or much appreciated in anterior segment OCT. So the patient was continued on mycophenolate mofetil and prednisolone non-tapering dose, and he was followed up again after 3 months, and he was doing well with quiet eye. This is his 1 year follow up. So we can conclude that intermediate uveitis can be one of the frequent presentations of sarcoidosis and can present with vitritis and vitreous opacities. Suspect sarcoidosis in all cases of intermediate uveitis, and however, we need to rule out other cases of granulomatous uveitis as well, as we already saw. Complete systemic evaluation is very much needed, as we saw in our case. And ocular involvement on sarcoidosis can be in the form of anterior, intermediate, posterior, or panuveitis. And these cases respond very well to the oral steroids and immunomodulators, as seen in our case. So, this was my first case.
Yeah. Can we have a discussion on this and then move to the second case? Um, I would like request Dr. Vijay Tomar, please. So this patient had a very clear diagnosis because serum ACE was positive, MAN2 was negative, and the HRCT also showed lot of findings supportive of sarcoidosis. But we do get lot of patients where it presents like a TB or a sarcoid kind of a presentation, and a mutton fat KP is typical granulomatous, and sometimes in smokers also the serum ACE may not be reliable. In that case, do you prefer to do an AC tap because this patient had a AC tap done? Do you always do an AC tap in all these patients to rule out tuberculosis, or you just treat and then follow up the patients?
No, actually, in all these type of patients, rather than going on the first visit to for that AC tab, I will do other investigations like serum lysozyme, LFT, and that HRCT. And if that HRCT is suggestive of that pulmonary changes, which is correlating with the sarcoidosis, and the lysozyme titers are also high, or that on the liver function test, apart from the alkaline phosphatase, two more enzymes are found to be raised. And I will also do serum calcium as well as serum that 24 hours urinary calcium estimation. And if serum calcium titers are high, and along with that 24 hours urinary calcium estimation is also high, then I will go for that treatment for the sarcoid. But if all other investigations are negative, they are not in the favor, then I will go for the AC tap.
Sir, I have a question. I have a
Yeah.
question. Sir, how much reliable is the serum calcium level? Like, because I have like
No,
not seen. Yeah.
alone serum calcium is not reliable at all. But if serum calcium titers are high along with 24 hours urinary calcium levels, then
Okay.
it is very much indicative.
Okay, sir. So urinary calcium level also we should.
Yeah,
Okay, sir.
there is a role. And even if you are not having anything, then you can go for that bronchoalveolar lavage, that CD4 CD8 ratio.
Yes, sir. That was in this criteria.
Hmm. Or you are having some lymph node there and you can have that assist. I think better to do a biopsy.
Yes, sir. So also we have that third category of probable ocular sarcoidosis in case of
Hmm.
high clinical suspicion of sarcoidosis. This one.
And if you will go radiological investigation wise, now it is not always that bilateral hilar lymphadenopathy is present.
Yes.
Radiological diagnosis that is stage two, stage three. Only parenchymal changes are there. There will be no hilar lymphadenopathy will be there. That radiological that diagnosis, if we'll go in stage 0, there will be no changes. Stage 1, bilateral hilar lymphadenopathy is present. Stage 2, bilateral hilar lymphadenopathy along with parenchymal changes are present. Stage 3, only parenchymal changes are there. And then stage 4A and 4B are also there, which shows other involvements are also there.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Ma'am, Vijaya ma'am, would you like to know the soluble interleukin levels in case of a doubt we have in diagnosing TB and sarcoid? Do you prefer to do that, ma'am?
See, for us, what we usually do is that the MAN2 and the serum ACE levels are what MAN2 QTB serum ACE levels is what we do look at first. Then we look at the HRCT chest. And in case of doubt, the pulmonologist, if they advise for a bronchoalveolar lavage, that is what we do the next thing. So diagnosis usually based on these, unless you have a biopsyable lymph node.
lesion there in the chest. Okay. Yes,
Yeah.
ma'am.
So this is how we usually would like to first rule out the TB part of it and keep the sarcoid as a presumed diagnosis. Unless the
Yes, ma'am.
can
Ma'am, like about the CME, because it's an intermediate uveitis kind of a presentation, because when the patients present with CME, which one do you feel is better, intravitreal steroids or PST? Which one you feel is like a more useful in treating a CME related to this IU in sarcoid?
primarily the CME is because of the whatever the primary cause is. So usually our focus is on treating the primary cause. So if it is an intermediate uveitis, once you treat the primary cause, automatically the CME also gets resolved most of the cases, and we usually supplement with topical NSAIDs. Now, once the inflammation is fully under control and you still have a CME, one of the things is in unilateral. If it is unilateral and fatal patient, you would prefer to give. I would prefer to give a posterior subtenance. But if it is unilateral and pseudophakic patient, you have the option of giving intravitreal steroids also.
Yeah, intravitreal steroids or Ozurdex or something like that.
Pardon?
No, intravitreal TA, triamcinolone or Ozurdex implants, whatever. No, ma'am?
Usually would prefer to give Ozurdex, but again depends on if the patient is able to afford it or not. But more importantly, if the primary inflammation cause is taken care of, most often this is also taken care of. In some, if you have some vascular component to it, like an ischemia or something, then as an adjuvant you might consider anti-VEGF also.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. So the next I thought was like, when do we have to consider immunomodulatory therapy in these patients? Do you wait for some time with steroids for it to respond, or initially only you start mycophenolate as in this patient? Or do you wait for some time for the response and then start? Like, ma'am or Vijay, Dr. Vijay? Yes, anybody?
Actually, I will wait. I will, if the patient is not responding, again, I will raise the dose and slowly taper it off. And if it responds, okay, fine with it. If it is not responding at all, then the first thing that I will do to revisit the case that maybe I am dealing with a non-infectious uveitis or an infectious uveitis. If it's a non-infectious uveitis, then only I can think of giving this immunomodulatory treatment. Suppose if the patient has responded very well and the recurrence is there again after some time, again I will try oral steroids. At least I give two chances with oral steroids, and even after that, if it is the disease is recurring again and again, then only I will go for the immunomodulatory treatment.
Now,
What is your opinion, ma'am?
Yeah, I agree with Dr. Vijay. So we also initially give oral steroids the first time over, but in this particular case, what Anshukita presented is a very specific diagnosis, and most of the parameters are strongly suggestive of sarcoidosis. So you know that in this case, it will need long-term treatment. So in these cases, something like this, where you know that the patient may need long-term treatment, it is justifiable that you may start the immunosuppressives initially also. But otherwise, if it is looks like an idiopathic intermediate uveitis, might just give systemic steroids initially. And in recurrent cases where you would want a long-term steroid, there you would start immunomodulators also.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. And what about intermediate uveitis in this kind of a presentation in a pediatric group, ma'am? Like, what are the other DDs should be considered?
Yeah, so most common will still be idiopathic only. So the other thing is the sarcoid itself presenting in the very early stages. And I think Dr. Sudarshan has reported a family of Blau syndrome. And also a variant where you will get granulomatous uveitis, arthritis, skin lesions, and JIA. definitely GI is one of the differentials in a pediatric age group. And masquerades, you have to think of, in case of vitreous opacities, you have to think of leukemias, lymphomas, and retinoblastomas. So these are the things you will think of in a pediatric.
Pediatrics. Oh, yes, ma'am.
In pediatric, Aparna, I have a point. In
Yeah,
pediatric
yeah.
patient, again, the serum ACE titers are not very reliable because in kids, that serum ACE titers are found to be higher on the higher side. Second thing, that if a kid is presenting with this type of picture, I will go ahead with the JIA. I will rule out JIA definitely. And as Madam has said, I will also rule out masquerades and that Blount syndrome. One thing in the kids with ocular sarcoidosis, there are two type of presentation. First is the early presentation that is seen below the age of 4 years, where pulmonary involvement is not at all. And in the elderly age group, that is in between 8 to 15 years age of ocular sarcoidosis in pediatric subset, pulmonary involvement is there. The only thing that joints can be involved both in sarcoidosis as well as in the JIA. But the important thing is that in sarcoidosis, there is no destruction of the joint. So there will be no pain or there will be no limitation of the movement of the joint. So that
Very
serum ACE titers, I always tell my PGs that serum ACE titers in children are very dicey.
yeah. Thank you very much for the very valid points, ma'am and Dr. Vijay. So, can we any other points to add regarding this case, or shall we move on to the next case, ma'am? You want to add something to this, or can we go to the next case, ma'am?
Yeah, we can go to the next case. All the differentials, I mean, this is a very nice case of very well demonstrated the granulomas and the nodules and the angle and all that. So, but all cases of granulomatous uveitis, both the infectious causes as well as the masquerades should be kept in mind as a differential diagnosis.
Yes, ma'am. And multiple sclerosis also in little more elderly patients.
Yeah, mostly if there is the vasculitis component, yes, multiple sclerosis also, as primarily very obvious granulomatous uveitis like this, slightly lower down in the list, but yeah.
Yes, ma'am. So just to keep us one of the DDs in the list. Okay. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much, ma'am. Dr. Anshukita, could you please present your next case?
Thank you, ma'am. So, I hope my screen is still visible.
Yeah, it's visible.
Yes, okay. So my second case was of a 61-year-old male who presented with complaints of both eye floaters, and he was a known case of seropositive rheumatoid arthritis for 14 years. He had a history of oral methotrexate use for around 12 years for rheumatoid arthritis, and he was shifted to tofacitinib by his rheumatologist 2 years back in view of severe disease progression. However, he had recurrent attacks of herpes labialis every year for past 10 years, and he also developed dendritic corneal ulcers in both eyes. He was treated with acyclovir ointment only and low-dose topical steroids for the same. So his treating rheumatologist stopped oral tofacitinib and considered on restarting him on oral methotrexate 20 milligram weekly dose. He noticed floaters in both his eyes, and he was diagnosed. He showed to some ophthalmologist at his native place, and he was diagnosed as retinal vasculitis and was started on oral steroids for the same. However, the symptoms still persisted, so he visited our OPD for the further management. So his clinical examination showed a BCV of 6.6 N6. IOP was normal, color vision was normal. His cornea showed pigments over endothelium in both the eyes. Right eye anterior chamber was quiet, but left eye showed 2+ cells. However, both eyes showed AVF cells. So this was his fundus examination, which showed peripheral retinitis patches, as we can see here. in both the eyes, along with sclerosed vessels, multiple hemorrhages, and in both the eyes, which is more visible in these enlarged images, as we can appreciate it better. The sclerosed vessels, retinitis patches, as well as a few hemorrhages are there. We did fundus fluorescein angiography for this patient, and we could see extensive CNP areas extending from mid periphery to far periphery in both the eyes, with a few preserved or revascularized areas in the periphery in right eye, and vasculitis and disc staining late stage in the left eye. So our provisional diagnosis was bilateral early acute retinal necrosis. We did few investigations in which we found that the CBC of that patient was having showed very low lymphocytes. Then ESR was very high. That was more than 140 mm/hour, and he also had low CD4 count, and all other systemic investigation was negative. So it was an alerting situation for us. So we also again did AC tap in this patient, which was unfortunately negative for HSV, VGV, and CMV viruses. So we decided to go with the treatment, and immunosuppressants were stopped immediately, and the patient was shifted to non-steroidal anti-inflammatory analgesics for his rheumatoid arthritis after consulting with his rheumatologist. Uh, then he was started on oral acyclovir 1 gram 3 times per day. Oral steroids were started after 1 week of antivirals and after getting physician's clearance for the same. And also, we did a retina consultation for this patient, and 4 weeks. He was called 4 weeks after starting on this medications, and pan retinal photocoagulation was done for this patient. This was his 1 month follow-up picture. We can see that the CNP areas in both the eyes were well lasered, and we can also see that we could also see that retinitis patches and vitritis were decreased. The patient was continued on acyclovir and topicals. This is his 3 months follow-up, and the patient was actually responding quite well, and no new lesions were found on his follow-up visits. This was his follow-up FFA post-treatment of right eye, and this is of left eye. So we we know we know that these chronically immunosuppressant patients of rheumatoid arthritis are at an inherent risk of herpes virus infection as well, and this risk increases in the elderly group, as we have seen, and it is elaborated in many of the literatures. So in this group of patients, a proper examination and prompt intervention is, along with the combined approach of both rheumatologist and ophthalmologist, can help in salvaging the vision at an early stage. So this was about my second case. Thank you.
Yeah. A very nice case, Dr. Anshugita. It's very nice to see ARN, which is looking so beautiful after treatment. Usually it goes into RD and RD surgeries. No, usually we don't get such beautiful post-treatment pictures of ARN. This looks
Yes,
very
ma'am.
nice. So it's very nice to see ARN like this, because maybe we picked up early, and whatever may be the reason, but it looks very beautiful to see an ARN like this.
I think that patient was chronically immunosuppressed as well, so that
That was the cause for ARN. Maybe that is immunosuppressed, but the treatment part I'm saying, after treatment, it looks so nice actually. The
yes,
ARN, usually after treatment, it doesn't look, very rarely we see like this actually.
yes, ma'am.
Anyway, it was very nice. So like regarding the discussion part of it, I thought of like few things which might be very useful for us, because this patient had a PCR negative for all the viruses. So like, in case we have a presentation like this, what is the next step we do? So whenever this PCR is negative for all the three viruses, how do we interpret a negative PCR for viruses in patients who are chronically immunosuppressed, maybe HIV patients or patients on chronic renal post-renal transplant patients on chronic immunosuppression. So, like, what are the points which we should remember? May I request the panelists to please take us in.
See, in immunosuppressed patients per se, that would not be a reason for the ACTAP to be negative. You typically there is a potential to get more chances of the virus, but what is the reason for the PCR negative would be more the sampling. Like, there is a very localized posterior segment disease, so the ACTAP, probably that is one of the reasons where you can get an ACTAP to be negative, or the patient has already been treated before. So these are some of the reasons why you can have a PCR negative. Clinically, if you strongly feel that it is viral retinitis, then you go ahead and you treat. You have an option of doing a vitreous biopsy in this case also. So if you have a suspicion of something else, either some other opportunistic infection, or if you feel that it is a masquerade, you would have to go in and do a vitreous biopsy and check for those, rule out those issues. Otherwise, by and large, the if you even a posterior segment localized disease, if you're doing an ACTAP, I think the one of the large series which Partho has published, or he's going to publish, also showed that almost about, I think, 15% of our ACTAPs are also negative wherever we are doing for the ARN patients.
If at all these patients, when they do a VR intervention, VR surgery, the vitreous samples may be positive in these patients, no ma'am? Maybe
Yes.
the AC I think we might have to compare the AC and the vitreous samples and then like say it's negative, that kind of maybe. So like then yeah, Dr. Anshukita, you wanted to say something?
Yes, ma'am. One more thing that I have read, that recently this Epstein-Barr virus has been associated with that patients who are on like for RAs who are on chronically on methotrexate and tofacitinib. That EBV virus has been on a associated with IRN. I have read a couple of cases regarding that. So should we go for Epstein-Barr virus test also?
We
Like
don't
include that PCR?
we don't test for it, but luckily it also responds to valacyclovir.
Well, yes, ma'am.
Yes, sir. There was one child who came from some Dubai or somewhere. One small child came with ARN with RD. So that child actually SKG ma'am had seen and ma'am had ordered for this one Epstein-Barr also, but it didn't come actually. But anyway, it was varicella positive, VZV positive. So the treatment would have been same only. It came out to be VZV positive actually. Same thing. And ma'am, like what are the ma'am or Dr. Vijay, please, any recommendations for because the patients are already on immunosuppressants, and like how do we have to proceed in managing these patients with ARN? So they have a viral retinitis, but they are chronically immunosuppressed. So what are all the points to be kept in mind when we start treating these patients, ma'am?
Dr. Vijay would like
Dr. Vijay, would you like to take?
I think that if the patient is coming negative with that AC tap, now I think that I will repeat one test, and along with that, I will go for that Goldman-Whitmer coefficient.
Yeah. Okay, from the serum and also from the AC fluid.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So that Goldman-Whitmer coefficient, that if it is more than that 5, then it is almost confirmative of that that the disease is there. But if it is in between 1 to 5, then we can suspect. And then one more thing. Recently, I have gone through one that microbiology paper. They are suggesting nowadays that reduced CD4 CD8 ratio can be used as a biomarker for viral infective illnesses. I don't know that how much reliable that is, but now they are suggesting that reduced CD4 CD8 ratio should be considered for the viral infection.
Yes, yes.
The only problem with the Goldman-Whitmer is that the antibody formation is usually going to be a little slower in, I mean, ARN, considering that ARN is very rapidly progressing, it probably would be more useful in toxo related infections.
Because we need a immediate uh, this one response. Maybe 2 or 3 days maximum we can wait. No, ma'am. We might not be able to wait longer for that reports to come.
Yeah.
So, and what about this? They say like the resistance to acyclovir in some patients, especially it is more in immunosuppressed patients. So, like, have you faced any patient who is not responding? Any patient who is not responding to acyclovir? So,
I had
initially,
reported one case with Dr. JB. Actually, we had published this where the patient was on valacyclovir, but it was not on acyclovir, IV acyclovir, and was not responding. And the patient was also different. It was immunosuppressed. I'm not very, I don't remember it now, but for whatever reason, it was not responding. And then the real-time PCR was also showing consistent, progressively increasing numbers. So, sir had managed to get Foscarnet for that patient. So, he had received a dose of Foscarnet, intravitreal Foscarnet, and then switched back to intravitreal, then switched back to valacyclovir actually. Once he
so that's
responded.
that's what like normally in immunocompromised patients they say like IV should be given simultaneously intravit either Foscarnet or ganciclovir. Something has to be given along with IV. We just cannot be waiting for the IV to work. That is what is recommended, no ma'am, for
Yeah,
immunosuppressed patients. Like
yeah,
more
long.
vigorous treatment.
Yeah, so because of the chronic exposure to the antivirals and the chronic viral episodes going on, that is why we developed that mutation.
Yes, ma'am. So, like, do you regularly check the CD4 counts in all the patients who are on, not the HIV patients, the other patients on immunosuppression? Do we have to check for CD4 counts before we start the patients on this treatment with acyclovir and all this, ma'am, to guide us regarding the treatment and so that
No,
they might, you do it regularly or?
no, I don't. I don't do the CD4 count, but I know that for biologics, like say for example rituximab and all, yeah, can have a rapid.
Okay.
But for
Um,
I don't.
Yes, ma'am. Because like sometimes CMBR and all, it can mimic a presentation like this, the peripheral thing, which is not progressive. So in that case,
No,
like
this
CMBR.
patient is definitely a known patient of already using. What was he using?
Ma'am, methotrexate first and then tofacitinib.
Yeah, so he's already on JAK inhibitors. JAK inhibitors anyway are known to suppress that interferon mediated viral defense. So you already know that the patient is prone for viral infection. So in case of any doubt like this, uh, in these cases you can do a CD4 count.
And he also had recurrent like herpes labialis, like
Yeah,
lesions before.
yeah. So
And
herpetic infections are one of the most common things with the JAK inhibitors. So in these cases, yes, definitely. But even otherwise, if you're suspecting an atypical presentation and your AC tap or your vitreous biopsy shows up a CMV, then definitely you will. If you've already not done a CD4 count, then yes, you would do that again.
In that case, we can add. Okay. Dr. Vijay, in this case, for the differential diagnosis, other than this like viral, do you think of toxo or something? Because it's peripheral, atypical toxo presentations also can be like this, immunosuppressed patient. Like
Apart,
in that case, how
apart,
do you differentiate?
yeah, apart from this, Aparna, I would also like to rule out syphilis. I have seen one patient initially whom I thought that it was present, peripheral lesions were there and they are necrotic retinal lesions. So I was suspecting that this patient is having that ARE. So I started acyclovir, but the disease was not responding at all.
Okay.
Under that investigation, found that PDRN and TPHA both were positive. So syphilis can mimic like ARN, and apart from that, I would like to rule out toxo also. They will present it like that.
But that, typically OCT, but in this patient, it's very peripheral because OCT, we might not even reach that area. Suppose
Hmm.
if it's little bit towards the macula and all, OCT might be very useful in differentiating this viral toxo and that syphilis also, no? Because more of
Hmm.
placoid kind of thing will be there in
Hmm.
syphilis. So, but since this lesion is very, very peripheral, the OCT might not be
Hmm.
possible in this
No.
patient. But
The
so,
syphilis blood test is one of the, it's very important. See, most of our uveitis workup will include the RPR-TPHA anyway.
yes, ma'am. So again, like vitritis also, we cannot believe in this patient because he's already immunosuppressed. So based on the vitritis also, like we might not get much clues actually, no, ma'am. So OCT, if it's little central, OCT might have been useful. And like any patient, but like what about that intravitreal lymphomas, ma'am? Like how do they present and bilateral kind of presentation?
Yeah, unlikely that you will have a simultaneous symmetrical bilateral presentation, but if you find more of vitreous opacities and subretinal infiltrates, then what we usually do is the MYD88 from the vitreous by MYD88 mutation. We don't do that IL-10, IL-6 ratio.
Yeah.
I think
So
in the Western literature they do that quite often, but we do that MYD88 mutation. So that is one of the things which you can do to rule out lymphoma.
lymphomas. Okay, but maybe this patient, it was like healing very well, and FFA also showed lot of CNP areas. Some we knew like there is some blockage was
Occlusive.
there, lot of
Yeah.
CNP areas, and but sometimes clinically this could be a differential for
Yes.
lymphomas also, no, ma'am. So
Yes. Yes. You
that is
wouldn't see
also.
such usually such extensive CNP areas.
Yes, ma'am. And what about the like prophylactic laser, ma'am? Some in the case of ARN, this patient because we have that FFA, most of the patients with ARN will have dense vitritis and wet membranes and all. We might not even be able to see the retina clearly. In that case, that FFA might not be this clear. That picture of FFA. So, like, do you recommend? Do you like this one prophylactic laser treatment for ARN? Like, what is your opinion about it, ma'am? Dr.
No,
Vijay also.
our studies have not found any beneficial effect of doing laser, definitely not in the active stage. Although you can have an RD developing in the active stage also, but usually it is once it is healed and you have the thinned out retina, and that's when it comes anywhere between the first 2 to 3 months. But we our studies have not shown any beneficial effects of doing a laser barrage, as in to the magnetic retina.
Prophylactic.
But I think
Yeah,
here
prophylactic.
more for the CNP areas, and only after that initial inflammation had subsided.
Yes, ma'am. Dr. Vijay, like, what do you feel about prophylactic laser treatment? Okay. So, what about the vitrectomy, ma'am? Like, some people say, like, prophylactic vitrectomy might also be useful in
No,
acute ARN patients.
no, we don't do that.
Okay. So, like prophylactic vitrectomy also is like not indicated because there are some papers which say like prophylactic vitrectomy has reduced the chances of RD in these patients, but
No.
we don't do that, no, ma'am, regularly. So we always wait
And those
for.
paper also suggest, Aparna, that the final visual outcome, there is no impact on the final visual outcome, even with this
So,
prophylactic vitrectomy.
so prophylactic vitrectomy versus means I mean only medical treatment versus medical treatment with prophylactic vitrectomy. You mean?
No, no. I would go with the medical management only. That laser
Uh,
barrage, that is again a debatable thing. That meta-analysis of this laser barrage papers, they say that there is no benefit. And
yeah.
again, that PPV, that there are few papers which says that it is not going to affect the final visual outcome. So why we should go for an invasive procedure? I think it is better to go ahead with the medical management only.
Oh, yes, yes. And like any place, like especially in immunosuppressed patients, when do you consider neuroimaging? Do you any time consider like neuroimaging, MRI or something? If the patient
If
has got severe headache,
if
anytime.
if, if neurological clinical features are there, which are suggesting that meningitis or meningoencephalitis is there, then only I think that we should go for that neuroimaging. Otherwise, I think that we should wait. We shouldn't go for that.
Okay, because this patient bilateral and also this patient has got a immunocompromised state. So you don't do, you will just wait for the symptoms or something and then only we have to do, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Ma'am, what do you prefer? Like, think about neuroimaging, ma'am, for these patients?
Yeah, I agree with Dr. Vijay that if the patient has any systemic evidence or like dizziness or some weakness, paresthesias, or ocular features suggestive like an RFPD or history of having pain and sudden loss of vision or past history of uh, anything like that, then only we send them for a neurologist opinion or a neuroimaging.
Okay, ma'am. So, any other points to add, ma'am? Dr. MK, ma'am, is there? Ma'am, do you want to add something to this?
We generally give antivirals as a maintenance dose for some time for patients who are suppressed or
Yeah.
who would need to be on biologics for their other systemic conditions. So that is one of the things that the maintenance dose probably will be needed for this patient for long term.
Long term. Till they're on biologics, at least we might have to give a antiviral cover also along with that, no?
Yes, exactly,
If
exactly.
already both eyes are involved, if it's one eye, it's okay. Both eyes
Yeah.
are already affected. So
And he
even
has
more.
had other viral infections also, recurrent viral infections. So he will need maintenance dose of antivirals for cover if he's on biologics.
And like some people are talking about a prophylactic antiviral vaccinations like varicella zoster vaccines and all for people who are like on long-term immunosuppressants, like
Yeah,
for
yeah,
some other
yeah,
systemic
yeah.
causes.
Yes,
So,
yes. So when we
uh,
send them to the rheumatologist, some of them do advise.
yes, ma'am. Like because they are the ones who are taking care of it. So, like MKA ma'am and SRB ma'am, would you like to add something to these cases, ma'am?
I'll give the summary. And
Excellent cases and very good discussion. Yeah, I think Mona will end the powwow with her summary as usual. Over to you, Mona.
Thank you, ma'am.
so, so we had very interesting cases by Dr. Anshukita showing two ends of a spectrum. First was the slow smoldering, and the second was the more aggressive disease. So, sarcoidosis, I would say, whispers in the lungs, but then it shows its color in the eyes. And here today we saw it in the form of intermediate uveitis. And I'm very happy that gonioscopy was done, and the criteria by the International Workshop on Ocular Sarcoidosis also includes gonioscopic features, and they are the not so lucky seven signs based on which you can have a definitive, presumed, or a probable diagnosis of ocular sarcoidosis. And we had a very elegant protocol both by Dr. Vijay and Dr. VGR, who gave a very elegant protocol of how to investigate these cases. First of all, rule out any infection, and then any infectious cause, and then along with that, do serum ACE levels, HRCT, chest, or a BAL, or if there's a lymph node biopsy. And Dr. Vijay emphasized that calcium estimates in serum as well as urine are also helpful. And usually, steroids are the main stay of treatment, the first line. But sometimes, if you know it's going to be long term, as Dr. Vijaya said, you can start with mycophenolate or any other appropriate medicine. And the CME usually resolves with the primary treatment once the primary cause is treated. But if it is still there, then based on the lens status, you can give intravitreal or subtenon steroids. So the second case was very, I would say, a beautiful outcome to a usually devastating disease in a chronically immunosuppressed patients. We had a good discussion on what was the differential diagnosis, for example, toxosyphilis, and how OCT may also help in differentiating how we should rule out primary lymphoma in these cases also, and in chronically immunosuppressed patients, prophylactic antivirals and even a vaccine can be given. Not much role is there of either a laser prophylactic or pars plana vitrectomy based on meta-analysis and other literature. So I think it was a nice, excellent cases by Dr. Anshukita, and excellent moderation by Dr. Aparna. Very insightful questions and very easy protocol, which I could also understand by Dr. VGR and Dr. Vijay. So thank you so much, and thanks everyone for attending, and also thank you to the multimedia department and Dr. Shikha. Dr. Shikha, you want to announce the next powwow?
Yeah, the next power will be next month, and I invite all the alumni, everybody, to share their interesting cases in every specialty. We've been rotating. The pediatric ophthalmology has been divided into three different further specialities. Like myopia is being done separately, squint separately, and there are interesting cases one can send to the respective. We've put it in the group that who are the respective moderators or in charges of the powers. Okay, thank you everyone. Great job, Aparna.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thanks, Aparna.
Good night.
Thank you.
Good
Shikha.
night.
Thank you, ma'am.
Good night.
Anshukita very nicely presented.
Thank you, ma'am.
Hi, Dr. Vinita.
Hi.
Very well. I mean, like you always share it so well. Good
Yeah,
night.
very simplified protocols.
Yes, very simplified. Yeah, we are also learning all the specialities. Every time that we attend, we learn something. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. I knew Mona would be happy to see the Gonyo pictures.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Vijay, ma'am. Thank you, Dr. Vijay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Aparna. Thank you, ma'am. Bye, ma'am.
Thanks, Dr. Vijay. Aparna, thanks. Bye.
Thank you, ma'am. Bye, bye.